Consequence procedures have to do with reinforcement. What are we going to do to reinforce these new alternative behaviors we're going to teach? And what are we going to do to reinforce the desired behaviors, the things that we want the student to do to begin with? Another part of consequence strategies deals with how to minimize the reinforcement the problem behavior gets. Remember, we want to make the problem behavior ineffective, inefficient, and irrelevant. One of the ways we do that is we minimize the amount of reinforcement it gets. Well, the only way you can minimize the amount of reinforcement a problem behavior gets is by understanding what the reinforcer is. In other words, that's why we do a functional behavior assessment. We want to know what the payoff is so that we can keep it from happening. Sometimes people will just make assumptions about a behavior. I see a lot of instances when a student or a child has a behavior problem and the assumption is immediately made that the kid is doing the behavior for attention. So part of the intervention is not giving the kid attention. Well, sometimes that's not the function. If the function of the behavior is to escape and the teacher ignores the student instead of prompting him or her to do some work, that may be actually reinforcing the problem behavior. Another example that's similar to the example I showed you in class is if people use time out as an intervention without understanding the function of a behavior, giving the student time out as a result of a behavior may be actually reinforcing the problem behavior as well. If the student asks for a break, what's going to happen? Maybe just getting a brief break is enough of a reinforcer. Or for some students, you might want to have some kind of reinforcement system that if they use the alternative behavior, at least once, they earn a reinforcer. And then you look at how can you eliminate reinforcement for the problem behavior. So if this behavior has led to escape in the past, how can you prevent this behavior from leading to escape? In other words, if the student's being sent out of the classroom every time this behavior occurs, is there a way that you can prevent that from happening? Sometimes it's appropriate just to move a student to a different area in the classroom, but still have the student complete work. Sometimes redirecting the student back to the task is enough. It depends on the situation, it depends on the student. And here's another example of a different competing behavior diagram. This is for the same student. So this is an example with a student who had some problem behaviors that served two different functions. In the last diagram, the function of the behavior was escape. Here, the function of the behavior is peer and teacher attention. Peer attention and interaction. The setting event is low levels of peer attention. The antecedents is the presence of peers. The behavior is hitting, kicking, and yelling and cursing in order to obtain peer attention. That's the function. The teacher wants the student to sit and attend, and the result of that is teacher praise. But here you can see where the problem might be. This student is doing this behavior to get peer attention. The desired behavior results in teacher attention. Maybe it's peer attention that's more important for this student. So we have to think about how can we use peer attention as a reinforcer. An alternative behavior that would lead to the same outcome as a problem behavior might be teaching the student some social skills, teaching him or her to initiate social interactions with peers. So then we go down to the planning phase. Is there anything we can do to help out with the setting event of low peer attention? Possibly we could arrange periods of time for the student to interact with other kids, or we could set that up. Sometimes students who have very poor social skills end up being socially isolated. So often they will do things to the other kids just as a way of initiating some kind of an interaction, even if it's a negative interaction. What are some antecedent strategies we might come up with? Well, the presence of peers is the antecedent for the problem behavior. That's the cue. So in the presence of peers, can we prompt the student to engage in appropriate social behavior? We can if we've taught the student those skills. So it sort of leads to the next area of teaching alternative skills. So teaching the student some basic classroom expectations, like can we teach the student to attend, and then can we teach the student how to initiate social interactions, and just as importantly, can we teach the student when it's appropriate to initiate social interactions? So in other words, if we teach a kid with autism to initiate social interactions, we need to also teach that kid that you don't go up in the middle of independent work and, hi, how was your weekend? I've seen that happen too. Part of using a skill is knowing when and where to use it. Then we come to the consequence column. The function of the problem behavior is peer attention and interaction. So we want to come up with some reinforcers. First of all, if we want the student to attend during instruction, then we've got to reinforce the student for doing that. So is there some kind of reinforcement system so we can reinforce the desired behavior of attending, and also reinforce the student for engaging in appropriate social interactions with other kids at the right time? One of the things we might want to consider, since this student's already shown us that he or she is going to work or do something to get peer attention, can we use peer attention as a reinforcer? In other words, can we have time to do something with a peer as part of the payoff? I always like to look at the function of a problem behavior as a potential source for ideas for reinforcers I can use. And then finally, we want to look at how we can minimize the amount of reinforcement the problem behavior gets. So when the student does hit or kick or yell and curse, what can we do to prevent that from resulting in peer attention? That's a lot harder, especially with younger kids. It's difficult to get them to not respond to something another student might do. Sometimes it's helpful to give them a different way of responding. In other words, you're going to be more successful instead of saying to students, when he does this, don't say anything to him. That's not going to happen. But you can give the students a response you want them to do. And if this kid is kicking at them or hitting them, then, it may be simply that you have them tell the teacher, real quietly. Or if he's yelling and cursing, then they could say something really calmly like, I don't like it when you talk that way. And that's not the kind of reaction they've been giving him. It depends on the situation. Some kids might be reinforced by another kid saying, I don't like the way you're saying that. So you have to individualize it. But the key is, what can you do to minimize the amount of reinforcement the problem behavior gets? So that's an overview of how you move from assessment to intervention. Do a functional behavior assessment, come up with a hypothesis of the function of a behavior, write a summary statement, then transfer your summary statement onto a diagram. What's the antecedent? What's the problem behavior? What's the consequence? Then you look at a desired behavior. What is it you want the student to be doing in the situation where the problem behavior usually occurs? What do you want the kid to be doing? And what is an alternative behavior? What is something that you can teach the student to do to lead to the same outcome as the problem behavior? Then you look at the antecedents. So is the antecedent for the desired behavior the same as the problem behavior? In this case, it's not. The teacher's the antecedent for the desired behavior, and peers present are the antecedent for the alternative behavior. Sometimes they are the same, as in the earlier examples. Then you look at the consequence for the desired behavior. What's the amount of reinforcement the student's getting for doing this already? Often you see there's an inequality here. The student gets more reinforcement and more immediate reinforcement for the problem behavior than for the desired behavior. So shouldn't be a surprise this is what the kid is actually doing. Once you have all that filled in, then you start looking at writing in ideas for each type of intervention. If there's a setting event, we look at things we might do to deal with a setting event. Then we look at the antecedent. We look at changes we might make in that situation. Can we change instruction? Can we change the setting? Can we provide something to the student to minimize the likelihood of problems going to occur? The next thing we look at is how we can teach an alternative behavior. How can we teach the student to do something that's going to lead to the same outcome as a problem behavior? When are we going to teach it, and how are we going to prompt the student to use the skill? And then finally, we look at consequence procedures. How are we going to reinforce the desired behavior, and how are we going to reinforce the alternative behavior, and how are we going to minimize the amount of reinforcement or payoff the problem behavior gets. At this point, we just write ideas down. These are bullet points. Later on, we'll look at each of these ideas. We'll eliminate some of them, and then others we'll expand into more detail, and this is eventually what's going to become the behavior support plan. And this is another example, just to sum it up, of a student who has a problem behavior that's maintained by escape from demands. This is the desired behavior. This is a possible alternative behavior.